Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora tata katoa e roho. Tēnā rawa tūrā koe a Iona. Ko ta manu kai ana i te hua o te ngāhere, te miro nōna no te Wautapanui ātāne. Ko te manu kai ana i te mātauranga, ko koe tērā hoki kei te tihi, kei te karamatamata o te taumata o te mātauranga harama. Nei rā, te wehe ngā rua, o tira whaka manawa tiana, whaka nui tiana, te kaupapa whakatai rangatia. Nō reira hara mai ki rungu te taumata, te papa o te atiawa, te honanga ko tahitanga mai o raukaua ki te tonga, Ngāti toa rangatira. Ka mutu, kei kone katoa, ngā kāwai rangatira katoa. Tēnei ka mihi ake hara mai, whakatau mai ra i runga anō i tō pōtai, te taumata hoki, te tihi o te mātauranga. No a tātou uri wakaheke, taiohi, mātātahi, rangatahi, no rātou te ao. Ko tau mai ki tēnei, te ao i te pō, mātauranga mai, tēnei ka mihi, tēnei ka mihi, e te mātanga reo, ara mai, piki mai, whakatau mai, tēnā koe, o tira, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Madam, you have now the palladium. Kia ora tātou.
Aroha mai. Extremely sorry.
I shall get it sometime. Not in this moment in time.
It is my absolute pleasure, now that it is my turn, apologies, to welcome our final keynote speaker. Iona Holsted began her career as a primary teacher based in Auckland. She then worked as an advocate and researcher for the Public Service Association, Aotearoa New Zealand's largest union. Iona Holsted held senior leadership roles in the Ministry of Social Development, including Deputy Chief Executive, Students, Seniors and Integrity Services. She worked as Chief Executive in the Education Review Office and since 2016 has been the Secretary for Education. Iona has extensive leadership experience and a history of giving back to her communities. Please join me in welcoming Secretary for Education, Iona Holsted.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana, kia koutou. It is lovely to be here and thank you for the very warm welcome. There was a little piece of my history, which I sometimes forget my history. One of the things that isn't on that CV, but for a couple of years I spent managing the Newtown Union Health Service. For some of you will know that community-based service, so I listened with interest this morning with the announcements about the changes to the health sector as well. It was my little foray out of social welfare and education into health. Thank you so much for inviting me today. The invitation that I received, and it was in the days when Jack was still president and Michael signed it off as well, was an invitation to come and talk for 30 minutes about anything I wanted to, which I thought was very generous. Thank you very much. So if you'll all just settle down. I don't intend to talk for 30 minutes. You have had a significant conference, and I'm sure that there are things that you want me to talk about, which I will only know about if you get the chance to ask me. But I will fulfil the brief in terms of giving you some thoughts about what's going on in the ministry and some of the things that I think we need to confront and manage and lead in the education system. And can I first start by acknowledging all of you who've contributed to this couple of days. I haven't had the chance to be here throughout it, of course, but I have had the chance to look at the timetable, and I can see that there's been a huge breadth of contribution. And from these experiences, the collegiality and the learning that you get through these experiences can't be repeated, I don't think, through anything, even through a Zoom. And can we just take a moment to acknowledge that we are the only people in the world who can do what we're doing today. And some parts of the world are actually going backwards, of course. So it is a real joy, I think, for us to have the opportunity to have that konehi ki te konehi meetings in a way that we've managed to do for quite a long time now. If we go back, excuse me, I'll just get some water. If we go back 12 months or so, of course, we were in full lockdown. And for those of you living in Wellington at the time, you will recall that we were blessed with a beautiful autumn. And I'm pleased to say that the weather's held itself for your conference as well, mostly. But of course, we were also blessed with some opportunities through COVID in an odd sort of way. For all of its awfulness, it gave us the opportunity to connect with each other and with whānau and children in a way that we had never done before, and we will never forget. And I think there's a lot we can learn from that. One of the things I want to acknowledge here today is your personal leadership throughout that time. As teachers, you hold a privileged and important role in communities. And I know that you stepped up and were those leaders in your communities when you needed to be. So thank you for that. And thank you for your continued leadership as we have to remain vigilant in what is an extremely volatile viral situation. But if COVID taught us anything at all, it was that a sharp focus on a small number of things with a collaborative effort behind it made a difference. So today I want to discuss some of the areas of focus in the ministry that I think we need to attend to within the ministry, and as I said at the outset, some of the things I think we need to attend to as a system. The government, the ministry and you as sector leaders are committed to creating positive outcomes for Auckland. We know, however, that the system as a whole, and schools in particular, are only able to cope with a certain amount of change at one time. We have a challenge in the ministry to listen to you and to others in the sector. We have a challenge to work together to make sure that when we are effecting change and change that we need to make in the sector, that we're doing it in a way that is going to land well and be sustainable. For many of you, you will experience from the ministry's end a vast array of policies and proposals and initiatives and pilots and plans. And for many of you, it will just feel like an onslaught. Our job in the ministry is to make sense of that. Our job in the ministry is to make sense of it so that when it lands in front of you, you can see how it connects as a single coherent picture rather than multiple different proposals. And there is coherence. We haven't been very good at creating it. One of the things that we have also learned through COVID is that policy made in Wellington is really, really good, but actually the practice that happens on the ground is different depending on the context it rests in. We've been very good in the Ministry of Education at creating policy. If you go through our annual reports at any time, you'll find that we're extremely busy making policy. We're not so good at working out how it's going to be implemented. So one of the things I've done inside the ministry now is set an expectation that whenever there is a policy proposal, it is accompanied by an implementation plan. And that implementation plan isn't a detailed, highly prescriptive plan because we can't stymie change, but it is a plan which says what are the impacts on the sector, and to the extent that we can, what are the cumulative impacts of multiple changes on the sector, so that we can work out when to do things and how to do them over a period of time which is sensible. You and I won't always agree on what the time frame should be. You and I won't always agree on what the resources need to be to support it. But the very least we can do is understand the impact of what it is we're proposing and work with you as far as practicable to do the right thing. I mean, ultimately, the ministry is here to serve, as all public service departments are, we're here to serve the government of the day. And to do that, though, we do have to provide free and frank advice. And part of that free and frank advice is understanding the impacts of the policy decisions that the government may take. One of the ways of doing that is listening, and while it's not always easy, the accord does provide us, the accord with PPTA and NZI does give us the opportunity to get input into some of those decisions earlier. Policy advice and practice also needs to be followed up with good quality, real-time evaluation and feedback loops. We can't wait until things have been implemented perfectly in order to know whether or not they're working. And again, your insights on the ground will tell us early in stages which things are working well and that we should go faster on, and those things that we need to tweak and change. So again, that feedback loop from the front line into the back office being the ministry, is critically important. The changes that I'm going to talk about later, and the changes that you're hearing about and you would have heard about from the Minister at the beginning of your conference, won't happen overnight. Even if we wanted them to, they can't. Apart from anything else, they're resource dependent, and resources don't always come when the decisions get made. And the education system, as you know, is a complex ecosystem. Changing it is complex. And the most powerful thing to change a system comes from how we do things rather than from how we're organised. However, how we're organised can signal what's important. And the establishment of the Education Service Agency is such an organisational shift. Because in principle it's saying, shift the heft of the Ministry of Education to the front line where it can work more closely with the sector, the profession, the support services within the profession to develop greater coherence and grow capability. Now, as I've said, the Education Service Agency is there to put more emphasis on the ministry's front line. One of the things that we can do, though, while we're establishing that is, as I said before, to listen attentively. Sometimes in the ministry I use two words. I say listen and respond, because listening is sort of half of the story, isn't it? Actually getting on and doing stuff is pretty important too. We need to listen more, and we also need to be better at managing the amount of stuff that we expect you to engage in. We need to understand which things are actually important to you and which things you actually don't care about. And we're needing to learn that in terms of our relationship with iwi too, who are rapidly getting exhausted by a government that wants to consult them on everything. So we do have to be a lot smarter about how we engage. At this point, I can't tell you exactly what the Education Support Agency will look like, because we're not at that stage yet. I'm in the middle of a process. But I can tell you one thing, we'll be looking for a much better name for it, and we're seeking out something that reflects our bicultural history rather than the ESA, which sounds a little bit to me like something that might be a supermarket. For now, though, I can tell you what the current proposal for the ESA aims to do. And I will read this because I don't want to get it wrong. And as I say, this is a proposal and we're in consultation as I speak. It's to deliver for all learners in Ākonga whānau, focusing on those the system currently does not serve well. Māori, Pacific peoples, those with disabilities and or learning support needs, and Ākonga from disadvantaged backgrounds. To work closely with and support education providers, early learning services, kura, schools, wharekura, including transitions between these and tertiary, with an emphasis on teaching and learning. Strengthen teaching and learning leadership. Enable effective participation of family, whānau, iwi and community. Ensure decision rights and responsibilities of the system as a whole are clear and informed by a sound evidence base. Align the ESA with the government's approach to supporting the regions. There's some quite hefty objectives and they will take years to fully achieve. I ask for some patience in that regard, and I ask for your enthusiasm for the shift that we're trying to make. I want to turn away, though, from inside the ministry for a minute and think more about the bigger shifts in the system. As I said at the beginning, COVID gave us some opportunities to think about things differently and to understand the world we live in a bit differently. And while there's always a lot to be done in education, in fact in any big system, in the interests of modelling less is more, I've chosen three. These challenges and opportunities are things for us all to lead on, in my view. An education system that learns and adapts to change, an education system that fosters critical thinking, and an education system that creates a strong sense of inclusion and belonging for all learners and their whānau. In the last 12 months, we've used technology to connect with and learn from each other. Through various distance learning options, we've reached into the homes of learners and whānau like never before. We need to continue that. But we need to build resilience in distance learning. As while it's essential now, it will almost definitely be essential again in the future, if not because of COVID, but because we're a flood-prone country, because we're an earthquake-prone country, and frequently our schools are closed for other reasons. I do not support the strengthening of distance learning as an alternative to face-to-face teaching. I do think we need to design fit-for-purpose blended learning. Technology supports higher levels of personalised teaching and learning, and done smartly, it will reduce teacher workload, and it can democratise learning and student agency. We need to be smarter at using machine learning and artificial intelligence to enhance well-being and self-efficacy. To achieve this, technology and AI will need to be used effectively, and they need to be accessible to everyone. Importantly, they need to be directly and deliberately linked back to our curriculum key competencies: thinking, using language, symbols and texts, managing self, relating to others and participating and contributing. And above all, must be built without bias. Beyond technology, we need to make data, and I mean data in the broadest sense of the word. It's the informal data that you get when Etione walks into the school and has got his head down and his shoulders are bent. That's data. Beyond technology, we need to make data our friend. To use it, understand what learning and sense-making is going on, so that we can design the next teaching step, or we can respond to Etione's needs in that moment. At a system level, we need to properly research and evaluate interventions within context, and locally hone the skills of inquiry to truly learn what is going on in real time. There's a plethora of national reports on good practice and research, but these do not translate into changed practice unless it's connected to the context that you work in. The second point I would focus on is leading a system that fosters critical thinking. There's an ongoing debate about whether the future of learning should focus on knowledge or competencies. And this is, of course, a false dichotomy. Competencies are developed and applied in context. Knowledge by itself is no good without the skills to manipulate it, apply it into new situations and build on it to create a new knowledge. We learn through, if we're successful, we learn through building knowledge and competencies to grow good citizens. But if I had to choose one competency for the future, it would be critical thinking. Critical thinking allows us to challenge the algorithms, validate or invalidate what we find on the web, and builds our moral and intellectual maturity. Our konga can access vast amounts of information in a nanosecond, and while the internet is largely a public good, it brings unintended consequences. The pace of change and the speed at which it has become ubiquitous has resulted in intuitive or experimental learning. While giving users a sense of knowledge, the combination of poor web literacy, unsophisticated search skills, and not understanding how a search engine works can lead to the inability to validate fact from fiction or opinion. And we've seen that play out internationally in a pretty major way in other parts of the world. There's a simple way of showing people the power of algorithm that underpins Google, or any other search engine for that matter. I'm not picking on Google, which I'm sure many of you are aware, but I'll remind you. If you go onto your phone and ask Google, are cats better than dogs? The first response is, dogs are bigger than cats, are likely to run up higher food bills, expenses are often bigger for dogs than cats. If you then ask, are cats better than dogs, the first response, sorry, I put this around the wrong way, but you'll get the message. The first response is, owning a cat isn't really much different than not owning a cat. Here are 13 reasons why dogs are better in every way than cats. So both answers are, of course, true, but reveal how the algorithm works. It's got an inbuilt bias. It's biased towards the question that is asked. So when I talk about the use of AI in business learning, I'm not meaning that this is a simple thing to do. It gives us an opportunity, though, to actually de-bias some things. And I was reminded yesterday, actually, of a conversation I had some years ago now with the then chair of ACC. They were piloting an algorithm to access health services for ACC clients. And they, as a part of the pilot, they would take a number out and get the humans to intervene and do the responses. They actually found the humans were more biased than the algorithm. So there is an opportunity here. The last 12 months have provided a case study of the dangers of disinformation and misinformation and underscores the importance of being able to critically evaluate different sources of knowledge and make judgments about the ones that we should trust. The third area, in my view, and is probably the most essential, is that we need to achieve a system where everyone is included and every child feels they belong. A system where rangatahi want to come to school. COVID-19 has again shone the light on inequity. But in short, we need an education system that meets the needs of children, not its children having to fit the needs of a system. We've been really impressed by the enthusiasm with which the teaching profession has sought to build capability into our Māori and tikanga and cultural capability. It's our job now to ensure that that curriculum and that PLD is available to fill that very big demand. Schools and other places, of course, do not exist in vacuums, and they reflect the society and things that you find in our society, including discrimination and bullying. The antidote to these ills is, however, unique in the New Zealand context. As Dr. Mary Berryman wrote some years ago, in order to change the experience of rangatahi and all our konga in our schooling system, 4 things. Manakitanga, deeply caring about those young people. Whanangatanga, deeply understanding where they come from, their identity, their language, their culture. Ako, we are both teachers and learners, all of us. And mahitahi, working together. To transform the education system to one that's truly inclusive, we need to do these things, and we need to do them more often and better. And we need to do them across the system. Bias, conscious or otherwise, has a corrosive effect on learning for multiple reasons, but one of the most is that prejudice that says that you can't do something, the lowering of expectations, is, in my view, the cruelest and the easiest to address. We all have a critical part to play in changing the experiences of young people so they do feel engaged and do want to learn and are able to learn. But in closing, can I again reflect on your leadership through COVID? Can I reflect on your leadership in coming here today and the role that you play in your schools as agents of change, because that's indeed what we all need to be. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My apologies, I've gone well over time. I'm very happy to take any questions if you have time for them, though.
Kia ora tēnā koe. I've got a question about streaming.
Oh.
So you've talked about, the idea of, we need to be supporting our students with, high expectations for teachers, etc. There's been some recent research concerning streaming. I'd like to know if the Ministry of Education has an official view on that. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, we have an official view in that we strongly support the work that Ngā Tahu has done, and we've actually helped them do it, and we agreed that they would lead out on it. So that's why you've got that report coming out, I suppose. We've said that we do not agree with streaming, and the Minister of Education has said he does not agree with streaming. And the next question is usually, so why don't you make it compulsory not to stream? So I'll just go there. It's a very important thing in my view, that when we make changes like that, and I would really like to declare that streaming shouldn't happen, what we need to do is back map what are the skills and the capabilities that we need to give to those teachers in order that they are comfortable not streaming. So it's a really good example actually of change in the system. I think there's quite a groundswell of change for that change, but actually we have to give people the time and the space to work out what they're going to do differently and how they're going to teach across capabilities before we go turn the switch off.
We do have some questions up on the screen, and I think if there's any time at the end we could add some additional ones too. Next question is from Nathan. We've heard at this conference the importance in change that side effects are considered, not just the desired outcome. So we need assurance that unintended consequences are realised and mitigated.
It would be a naive person who would give you that assurance. What I can give you an assurance of is that we will continue to listen and work with you so that we can understand those things sooner. There are always unintended consequences of any decisions that we take. It's the nature of decision making. But to the extent that we want to minimise those, absolutely. And we need to also keep moving. So as I said at the outset, we won't always agree on the speed and we won't always agree on the way, but I'm absolutely committed to saying, help us do it. Thank you.
From Grant, we have a question. Will blended learning platforms be funded centrally rather than schools making decisions around resource priorities with commercial providers, which are often offshore and do not link across the sector?
Probably a good question for the Minister. That's a big budget. So in terms of personal view is that we allowed the system, the fragmented system that we have, that we've inherited, is nuts in a country this size. Not everybody agrees with that, can I say? You'd be surprised how many of your members, and in fact, would actually prefer, they quite like playing with their own things. But as a matter of principle, I think the greater centralisation of those sorts of decisions make really good sense. And it comes back to that idea of what is it that the ministry at the centre needs to make some decisions about, and what at the front line should you be making the decisions about? And we haven't always got those parameters quite right. Ultimately, there's quite a lot of spend in this area anyway. So you would start with how can we, over time, reconfigure things to a more common platform. If I was the minister standing here, that's what I'd say.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for any further questions.
Sorry, there was one over there.
That was my question on the screen. What is the ministry's vision for, addressing the declining rates of achievement that we're seeing in international data, such as the PIRLS?
Look, it's the major emphasis is two things. One is we need to rebuild the capability of teachers to teach the curriculum, and you'll see through all of the local research that we've actually had teachers saying they're not teaching the curriculum, and that was particularly evident in science, maths and maths. So the curriculum refresh and the building of curriculum resources to help support teachers to do a better job in some of those access areas is really fundamental to that. Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. I've really appreciated how on top of our key issues you are, for your recognition of our leadership in this space, and especially through COVID, and your willingness to engage with our tricky questions. We have a small gift for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.